There is a certain kind of person you have probably never noticed. They are there, always. In every comment section they never wrote in every group photo they quietly stepped out of, in every party they attended and somehow also seemed absent from. They watch, they absorb, they remember everything. The texture of a conversation, the weight behind someone's laugh, the small tremor in a voice that everyone else missed. But they do not post, they do not perform, they do not announce themselves to the world. We live in an age that has made visibility a virtue. To exist, you must be seen. To matter, you must be documented. The feed must be fed, the algorithm must be satisfied. And somewhere in this relentless architecture of digital performance, a quiet question has gone unasked. What about the ones who watch? What about the ones who sit with their phone in their hands, scroll through the noise of the world, feel something deep and unnamed move through them, and then simply put the phone down? No caption, no story, no proof that the moment happened at all. Who are these people? What do they carry inside them that others cannot see? And why, in a world that rewards visibility with connection, validation, and belonging, do they still choose silence? This is not a video about social media addiction, or digital detox, or productivity hacks. This is something quieter than that. This is an exploration of a particular inner world, a world that psychology has only recently begun to map. A world that, if you are watching this right now, you may have been living in for a very long time. Welcome, you are not alone in your silence. To understand the quiet observer, we must first understand what happens inside a brain that chooses not to share. In neuroscience, there is a structure called the amygdala, a small, almond-shaped cluster of neurons nestled deep within the brain's temporal lobe. Its primary function is emotional processing. It is the sentinel, the gatekeeper, the part of you that reads a room before your conscious mind has even formed a sentence. And in certain people, particularly those with a history of emotional sensitivity, early emotional neglect, or what developmental psychologists call an internalized neglect schema, the amygdala is extraordinarily active. What does this mean in practice? It means that when a quiet observer considers posting something, a photo, a thought, a vulnerable moment, the brain does not simply evaluate the content. It evaluates the risk. It runs a rapid, largely unconscious simulation. Who will see this? How will they interpret it? What does it say about me? What if it is misunderstood? What if it changes how they see me? What if it is not enough? What if it is too much? This is not anxiety in the clinical sense, though it can be. It is something more ancient than anxiety. It is a deeply ingrained belief, often formed in childhood, that expressing yourself openly is dangerous, that being seen is not safe, that the world will not hold what you offer it with the same care you used to offer it. The psychologist Carl Jung called this process the construction of the persona, the mask we build to mediate between our inner self and the external world. For most people, social media has become the primary stage upon which the persona performs. Each post is a carefully curated projection of how we wish to be seen. Each story is a fragment of an identity being constructed in real time, for an audience, for approval. But the quiet observer refuses this performance. Or more precisely, they cannot sustain it without a profound sense of internal contradiction. Jung also spoke of the process he called individuation, the lifelong journey toward becoming who you truly are, as distinct from who the world needs you to be. It is a process of integration, of bringing light to the shadow, of recognizing and reclaiming all the parts of yourself that have been buried, suppressed, or abandoned. And for many quiet observers, social media feels like the antithesis of this journey. It feels like fragmentation, not wholeness, performance, not truth, surface, not depth. There is also the concept of metacognition, thinking about one's own thinking, which quiet observers tend to possess in abundance. They are not simply experiencing their lives. They are simultaneously observing themselves experiencing their lives. And this dual awareness creates a kind of natural pause before action, before posting, before speaking, before performing. Viktor Frankl, the great psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, once wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom. The quiet observer lives in that space. They have made a home of the pause, but a home can also become a hiding place. Here is where we must be honest, and compassionate and careful, because not all silence is wisdom. Not all invisibility is chosen, and not all quiet observers are simply deep souls swimming in still waters. Some of them are drowning very quietly where no one can see. Let us talk about the internalized neglect schema, Schema therapy, a framework developed by psychologist Jeffrey Young, describes core emotional wounds that form in childhood and shape our adult behavior in ways we rarely recognize. One of the most pervasive of these is the emotional deprivation schema. The deep, unshakable sense that one's emotional needs will never truly be met by others. That to need something is weakness. That to ask is to impose. That to show is to become a burden. Children who grow up in environments where their emotional expression was ignored, minimized, or punished often develop an extraordinary sensitivity paired with an extraordinary suppression. They learn, very young, that the world is not a safe place to be seen, that adults do not have the capacity to hold their full emotional truth. And so they fold themselves small. They become watchers. They learn to read the room rather than fill it. They grow expert in the emotions of others while remaining strangers to their own. These children, and the adults they become, often experience what we might call invisible grief, a mourning for something that was never quite named, a loss that left no funeral, no eulogy, no permission to grieve. They carry this grief into adulthood like a fragile tapestry hidden beneath their everyday clothing, invisible to everyone, heavy beyond measure. And here is the painful irony. The very sensitivity that makes the quiet observer so perceptive, so empathetic, so attuned to the world, is the same sensitivity that was once used against them. They learned to be invisible because invisibility was safer than expression. They learned to watch because watching gave them information, and information gave them a thin measure of control in environments that felt profoundly out of control. Social media, for these individuals, does not feel like a tool of connection. It feels like a stage. And stages, they learned long ago, are where you get hurt. But there is another layer here, one that is harder to name. Some quiet observers are not simply protecting themselves from pain. They are protecting the world from themselves. There is a deep, often unconscious belief that what they feel is too much. That their inner life, its intensity, its complexity, its raw and unfiltered truth, would overwhelm others, would repel them, would confirm the ancient fear that at their core, they are too much and somehow, simultaneously, not enough. This is the architecture of the heart that chronic silence builds, not a fortress of strength, but a labyrinth of protection. And somewhere in the center of that labyrinth is a person who has not yet been told, truly, deeply told, that they are allowed to exist fully, that their presence is not a burden, that their voice, when it speaks its truth, is not a transgression. The sacred stillness they inhabit can be real wisdom, but it can also be a wound wearing the disguise of wisdom. Learning to tell the difference, that is the beginning of everything. There is an old Zen teaching about the ocean and its waves. The waves crash and foam and surge and recede. They are dramatic, visible, constant. They announce themselves to the shore. But beneath the waves, the ocean is still unfathomably deep, containing within it every creature, every current, every ancient mystery. The ocean does not need the waves to be the ocean. The waves are simply what happens at the surface when the ocean meets the world. The quiet observer is not a wave. They are the ocean. This is not a poetic compliment. It is a psychological observation. There is a quality of depth, of resonant, patient, interior depth, that is genuinely rare, that the world genuinely needs. And that is almost always forged not in comfort, but in the refusal to be made shallow by pain. The ancestral echo of silence runs through human history. The hermits and the mystics and the philosophers who retreated from the noise to hear something truer. The writers who lived internally, filling notebooks that no one would read for decades. The scientists who spent years in solitude, turning an idea over and over in the sanctuary of their minds, until it became something that changed the world. Solitude, as the philosopher Paul Tillich wrote, is not the absence of company. It is the moment when our soul is free to speak to us, and we are finally quiet enough to listen. For the quiet observer, this listening is not a practice, it is a way of being. And when they begin to understand this, when they begin to honor it rather than pathologize it, something extraordinary can happen. The pain that taught them to be invisible begins to transform, not disappear, transform. The sensitivity that was once weaponized against them becomes a compass. The metacognition that made them perpetual observers becomes the foundation of genuine self-knowledge. The capacity for stillness that felt like isolation becomes the ground from which true presence grows. This is what Jungian individuation looks like in practice. Not a dramatic awakening, not a sudden performance of extroversion, but a slow, sacred interior reconciliation. A coming home to the self that was always there, Beneath the silence, beneath the protection, beneath the years of learned invisibility. And here is what psychology has begun to discover. The people who do this inner work, who turn their gaze inward with courage and compassion, often develop what researchers call post-traumatic growth, not just recovery growth, a capacity for empathy, for nuance, for meaning-making, that transcends what they might have become had they never suffered at all. The wound, when honored, becomes the teacher. The silence, when understood, becomes the sanctuary. If you have been watching quietly, if something in these words has felt like recognition, like a hand reaching through the screen and naming something you have carried without language, then let us speak directly, you and I. You are not broken. You are buried. There is a difference. Broken things need to be replaced. Buried things need only to be excavated, slowly, carefully, with the right tools and without violence. The path toward healing for the quiet observer does not require you to become loud. It does not require a public declaration of your inner life, a sudden willingness to perform yourself for the world's consumption. The world does not need your performance, but you need your presence. Your own presence, in your own life. Self-reconciliation is not self-attack. It is the practice of turning toward yourself with the same attentiveness you have always given to others, of noticing what you feel and allowing it to be real without immediately containing it, analyzing it, or apologizing for it. It is the practice of asking, very gently, what do I need? Not what is expected of me, not what would be least disruptive, not what would make me least visible. What do I actually need? This question, small, simple, revolutionary, is the beginning of the identity project, the ongoing, never finished, always evolving process of becoming who you actually are. You may find, as you walk this path, that you begin to share more, not for validation, not for the algorithm, but because something inside you has found enough safety, enough self-trust to let itself be seen, in small ways, in chosen spaces, with chosen people. Or you may find that you remain largely private, and that this is not a wound, but a preference, a genuine, dignified, freely chosen orientation toward a quieter life. Both paths are valid. Both paths are whole. The only thing that is not valid, the only thing worth changing, is the silence that comes from fear, the invisibility that comes from believing you are not worthy of being seen. You are worthy. You have always been worthy. The world simply did not always know how to tell you so. There is a particular kind of pain that has no name in most languages. It arrives not with a dramatic event, not with a loss you can point to and say, there, that is where it happened. It arrives quietly, in the blue light of a screen, in the space between one scroll and the next. It arrives when you see someone else living what feels like the life you were supposed to have, and something in your chest contracts, not with hatred, not even with envy exactly, with something older and more tender than either. With the quiet grief of a life that feels, in that moment, like it is happening to someone else. This is the comparison wound. And for the quiet observer, it cuts in a way that is entirely unique. Because here is the cruelty of it. The very people who watch the most are often the ones who feel the most. They do not scroll mindlessly. They scroll with full attention, full sensitivity, full emotional presence. Every image lands, every highlight reel registers. Every glimpse of someone else's joy, success, belonging. It does not slide off the surface. It sinks, straight down, into the place where the quiet observer keeps the things they have not yet been able to say out loud. The psychologist Leon Festinger, writing in 1954, described what he called social comparison theory. The idea that human beings have a fundamental drive to evaluate themselves by measuring against others. This is not vanity, it is not weakness, it is evolution. We are social creatures who survived by understanding our place within the group. Comparison was once a tool of orientation, a way of knowing where we stood. But social media has turned this ancient instinct into something it was never designed to handle. We were built to compare ourselves to the 20 or 30 people in our immediate community. People we knew fully, with all their flaws and failures and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. Now we compare ourselves to thousands, to curated highlights, to the best 10 seconds of someone's best day, presented as evidence of their entire existence. Our nervous system does not know the difference. It receives the information and runs the ancient calculation. They have more, therefore I have less, without access to context, without the humanizing knowledge of what those lives actually cost. And for the quiet observer, this wound has a second blade. because they are not only comparing their life to others, they are comparing their inner life, rich, complex, feeling, to an outer world that does not seem to require depth to succeed. They watch people perform effortless confidence and wonder what is wrong with them, that confidence feels so far away. They watch people share their joy openly and feel simultaneously moved and bereft. Moved because they feel it too. Bereft because they cannot seem to find the bridge between what they feel and what they can show. This is what the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard called despair of not willing to be oneself. The quiet suffering of someone who senses the distance between who they are and who the world seems to reward for being. It is not a dramatic despair. It does not announce itself. It accumulates in small moments, in late nights, in the particular silence that follows, closing an app and staring at the ceiling and feeling, without quite knowing why, like you have missed something essential. But here is what the comparison wound asks us to understand. What you are mourning in those moments is not someone else's life. You do not actually want their life. The algorithm has only shown you its surface, which is always a fiction. What you are mourning is the unlived version of your own, the parts of yourself that have not yet found expression, the dreams that have been waiting, patiently and painfully, in the antechamber of your silence. The comparison wound is not really about them. It has always been about you. And this is not an accusation. It is an invitation. The philosopher Rumi wrote of the reed flute, cut from its reed bed, crying its longing into the world. The wound, he said, is the very place the music comes from. The ache of separation is inseparable from the song it produces. You cannot have one without the other. The quiet observer who sits with their comparison wound, who does not run from it, does not drown it in more scrolling, does not punish themselves for feeling it, but instead asks, with genuine curiosity, what is this ache pointing toward? That person is already doing the most important work, because underneath every comparison wound is a desire. And underneath every desire is a self that still believes it is worth something. A self that has not given up even when it seemed like it had. A self that is watching, always watching. Not just others, but the faint outline of its own unlived potential, flickering like a candle in the dark. You have not lost your life by watching someone else's. You have simply been looking for yourself in the wrong direction. Turn the gaze inward. What you are looking for has been there, waiting, in the sacred stillness of your own unrepeatable existence, patient as water and just as essential. There is a kind of peace that does not announce itself. It does not post about its mourning. It does not document its growth. It does not need an audience to confirm that it is real. It simply exists quietly in the body of someone who has learned, slowly, painfully, beautifully, to be at home in themselves. The quiet observers are not disappearing. They are simply living in a frequency that the noise of the world cannot quite pick up, and perhaps that is enough. Perhaps, in a world that has confused volume with significance, visibility with value, performance with truth, the most radical act of all is simply to be ordinary and conscious, to move through the world with full attention, to feel deeply without needing to prove it, to exist completely in the ordinary sacred stillness of your one and only life. You do not owe the world your interiority, but you owe yourself the courage to know it. Thank you for watching quietly.